Really is astonishing, the things that Louise Casey has highlighted in here. Some of the things you were talking about, the idea of whistleblowers being silenced. There's one case that she talks about information not being passed on after 21 laptops went missing and there was an investigation but no break-in. It all sounds quite dodgy and clearly things that the police think that they should look further into. And I think that in many ways it's taken a long time to get to this point. Two very, very detailed reports here, but clearly the police do believe that they need to take this further.
OK, for now, thank you, Anishka. Meantime, the New Zealand High Court Judge Lowell Goddard has been named as the new chair of the Historical Child Abuse Inquiry. Justice Goddard was selected from a pool of 150 candidates after consultation with victims' groups. The existing inquiry panel will be dissolved and members will be able to reapply for their positions. Two former chairs, Lady Butler-Sloss and Dame Fiona Woolf, had previously stood down.
Is interesting, isn't it? And there's many striking phrases in what Louise Casey has said, but when she says they were in denial, they felt that they were no worse than anyone else. Now, I'm not clear whether that's individually or collectively, whether they were looking at other councils thinking, well, plenty of other councils have problems too. I suppose that goes to a cultural problem of groupthink.
And it may be that the people inside the council thought that, but what we know is that other councils are not like this. There are a large number of local authorities throughout the United Kingdom. Some of them are really brilliant. Some of them, inevitably, given how many of them there are not going to be so good. And this is a particular example which has failed in a particular way, in a really dreadful way for the young people concerned. And again, this is an issue which is not unique to Rotherham. I must make that point. It's not Rotherham as a place that's failed here, but it is clearly that the culture of the council and the way it was operated does need to stop and be recast, put back together again, and then fresh elections take place, with a hope that from then on the people of Rotherham who will vote in the new councillors when that point happens, and the media locally and others, will keep a really beady eye on the way councillors and their officers then behave. But in the meantime, the government's got the responsibility of finding commissioners, putting them in, taking over the control of the council for the time being.
Yes. Professor Tony Travers, very good to talk to you. Thanks for your insight this afternoon. Thank you. From the LSE.
Well, meanwhile, the Home Secretary, Theresa May, has announced that Justice Lowell Goddard from New Zealand will be the new chair of the inquiry into historical child abuse. Since the inquiry was announced last July, two chairs have resigned. Well, Mrs May also announced changes to the inquiry's terms of reference, as Sarah Corker now reports.
The Home Secretary set up the Child Sex Abuse Inquiry to examine decades of allegations, but it's been beset with problems. First, former High Court Judge Baroness Butler-Sloss, then the lawyer Fiona Woolf stepped down, both over apparent conflicts of interest. And after months of uncertainty over the future of the inquiry, today Theresa May revealed the name of the next chair.
Based on the clear feedback from survivors and the assessment of the nominations against the agreed criteria, I can tell the House that I plan to appoint Justice Lowell Goddard as the new chairman of the independent panel inquiry into child sexual abuse.
The New Zealand High Court judge was chosen from a shortlist of 150 people and interviewed via video link. It's a decision welcomed today by campaigners who met at the Home Office.
I think it will enhance the credibility of the whole inquiry, the fact that the Home Secretary has chosen somebody from a different continent but who has a good knowledge of how the British system works. I think that was really, really important, and it is somebody, I believe, of high credibility.
In July last year, the government announced the independent inquiry into the way public bodies investigated and handled child sex abuse claims. Baroness Butler-Sloss was chosen as head. But just 2 days later, she faced calls to quit because her late brother, Sir Michael Havers, was Attorney General in the 1980s. She stood down the following week. Then in September, the Lord Mayor of London, Fiona Woolf, was named as the new chair. But in October, she quit over her social links to ex-Home Secretary Lord Britton, whose handling of abuse claims in the 1980s has been questioned. This is expected to be Britain's biggest ever public inquiry, and there's intense pressure from survivors, MPs and the public for action to find out what happened in the past and what can now be done to make sure it never happens again. So after 2 false starts, it's hoped the inquiry, which could last up to 5 years, can now get going with a chair that survivors have confidence in. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons has explained the change in the terms of reference for the inquiry.
Well, the other key change announced today, which we were expecting, was that it will be a statutory inquiry. What does that mean? Well, it means that Lowell Goddard has the powers to be able to look at restricted documents, for example, police files, security service files, and also she will be able to call witnesses whether they like it or not, and they will have to give evidence under oath. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that they will need lawyers because they may be incriminating themselves, for example, in front of this inquiry, and that makes the whole thing bigger and more expensive. An Australian Royal Commission, which is currently ongoing, is costing about £200 million to carry out, and so this one is going to be a bigger deal all round. And so the Home Office has got to talk to national government to see whether there is funds for that, and I understand that that the centre, as it was put to me, is fully in favour and will do what it takes to keep this show on the road. And as for how long it's going to take, well, one source very close to the inquiry has told me that person expects it to last for 5 years.
Tom Simons there. Well, to remind... Good afternoon. Rotherham Council has been condemned as not fit for purpose, failing victims of child sex abuse and failing to tackle their abusers. A disturbing report details a complete failure of leadership, an organisation struggling with sexism, bullying and misplaced political correctness. The council's entire cabinet has now resigned, and the National Crime Agency says it's investigating potential criminal behaviour. Here are some extracts from the report for you. It says the council has ineffective leadership and management, a culture of covering up uncomfortable truths, silencing whistleblowers and paying off staff rather than dealing with difficult issues. It goes on to detail a pervading culture of sexism, bullying and silencing debate. The issue of race, it says, is contentious, with staff and members lacking the confidence to tackle difficult issues for fear of being seen as racist. It says this has helped fuel the far right and has increased racial tensions. Finally, as well as letting down victims, it says Rotherham Council has allowed the abusers to go unpunished. Little or no action is taken to stop or even disrupt their activities.
I was shocked by what we found and very, very concerned. We did think that on the back of Professor Jay's profound and important report that they themselves commissioned, that we would find a local authority that was much more open to change, much more open to the need to take action, and we didn't find that. The inspection team, of which I am the lead inspector, found that Rotherham Borough Council is not fit for purpose. It has let the residents of Rotherham down, it's let its children down, and profoundly it continues to let historic and current victims of child sexual exploitation down. I did not anticipate this. It is not something that we have done lightly. We take it incredibly seriously. It's a sad day for public services in the same way it remains a very sad day for victims of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. They cannot consent to their own abuse. It is for us in authority, in public service, to make sure that we do something about that, and in Rotherham they did not do a good enough job. Over a very long period of time, Rotherham Borough Council has had a combination of unique factors, in my view. I don't necessarily think it is typical of local government at all. A leadership that couldn't get a grip of the problem of child sexual exploitation, didn't ask enough questions, didn't take enough action. They didn't hold the police to account. They bring the Pakistani heritage community into disrepute. They, like me, like all of us, would want all criminals rooted out in any community and dealt with. So by wringing their hands, by being not able to deal with that issue, in many ways, in my view, they made it much worse.
Well, the MP for Rotherham has now asked for more funding and resources to help the victims.
Rotherham does deserve better. It has been let down. It is heartbreaking, but it is also disgusting, and every page has got a new horror on it. What I would plea, though, is that the Secretary of State puts resources in place so that we can move forward. I've been asking for 5 months for resources specifically to help the young people move on with their lives, and we're not getting that. We need that. What I would like to do, though, is for this House to recognise that this came about because of the tenacity of the survivors who kept coming forward and kept highlighting over years and years and years how they were being let down. And what I want to say is that they are champions now, because they have caused the change that we so dearly needed for our town.
Jason Farrell in our central London studio for us. Now, hello to you, Jason, but lots of people in the area tweeting me today to say, yeah, that's all well and good, a report about a report, but what's actually going to change?
Well, this is the extraordinary thing, Kay, because already a lot of things had changed after the Alexis J report last August. So the head of Children's Services stood down, the chief executive of the council stood down, the police and crime commissioner stood down. These big heads at the top rolled. But now what's being asked for by the Community Secretary, Eric Pickles, is for the entire cabinet to stand aside, and they have offered their resignation. They've got 14 days to respond to this, but they have offered their resignation. And for 5 commissioners to take over, they will take over children's services and adult social care and things like taxi licensing, which was also being done in an irresponsible way, according to the report. And those will be run until 2016, when Rotherham will be able to re-elect its council. So those are the immediate measures that are being taken place around the council. Meanwhile, the National Crime Agency also investigating criminal matters.
OK, and as far we heard there from the MP, Sarah Champion, who was speaking in the House of Commons today, asking for more money in order to be able to help these abuse victims. We've also heard from the criminal investigation, or there could be a criminal investigation as a result of this latest report. What happens from here? How does it push forward?
Well, I think this is the big thing, and you've hit the nail on the head there, because there haven't been the prosecutions. We spoke to Sarah Champion in an investigation we did last week, where we found that the number of cases were on the rise, that Sarah Champion was getting new cases coming to her every week, and the prediction was that the number of cases were far exceeding the 1,400 that had been identified by Alexis J, and yet no prosecutions. And this is what victims were talking about. Some even told us in that investigation that they had seen their abusers on the streets in their cars with young children, apparently flaunting the law. So what is going to happen to those people? Well, we know that the National Crime Agency has been overseeing now the South Yorkshire Police investigations. They will decide which investigations they pick up and take on themselves, which ones they feel South Yorkshire Police can take forward. But what Sarah Champion is saying, look, we need a national crime task force here to come in and oversee these kind of crises. It's not acceptable for the police, who aren't trained and specialise in this kind of abuse, to simply be able to handle this. So yes, she's saying we need more money, we need more resources, we need a national task force that can deal with these cases, not just in Rotherham, but if they happen elsewhere around the country.
OK, for now, thank you, Jason. New Zealand High Court Judge Lowell Goddard has been named as the new chair of the Historical Child Abuse Inquiry. Justice Goddard was selected from a pool of 150 candidates after consultation with victims' groups. The existing inquiry panel will be dissolved and members will be able to reapply for their positions. 2 former chairs, Lady Butler-Sloss and Dame Fiona Woolf, had previously stood down. In the last hour, the freed Al Jazeera journalist our central London studio is Richard Scorer, a lawyer representing abuse survivors at Slater and Gordon. Thank you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time. The latest of 3 chair. Are you feeling confident?
Well, I think there's a huge sense of relief this afternoon that we now have an inquiry chair. Clearly that was long overdue, and I think Theresa May made the right decision to look to the Commonwealth to appoint a judge. Clearly, by going overseas, she avoids the risk of appointing a judge in the UK who would be tainted by connections with establishment members who might be under investigation in this inquiry. So I think today is a positive day. I think what's important now is that the new chair sets out a very clear route map for how this inquiry is going to be conducted, and I think it's only by doing that, as soon as possible that we'll be able to rebuild the confidence of survivors in this process.
Why did it need to be a judge? Why couldn't it have been somebody from the NSPCC or some other similar organisation?
Well, of course, a number of different candidates were considered, but I think it was probably inevitable that it was going to be a judge once the consensus emerged that this needed to be a statutory inquiry. So clearly, with an inquiry that's going to wield legal powers, that is going to be able to summon witnesses, that is going to be able to compel the production of documents, with those powers, I think it was inevitable that this inquiry would be presided over by a judge.
And those that you are representing, the families of those that you're representing as well, are they comfortable that the panel has to now reapply for their positions?
Well, I think within the panel on the previous non-statutory inquiry, there was a good deal of expertise, and I think that in building this new statutory inquiry, the new chair will need to consider whether she needs the benefit of at least some of that expertise. There was good expertise, both academic and also survivor expertise. So I think the new chair will need to consider whether she wants to appoint some of those individuals as assessors in the new inquiry. That'll be something that she'll need to set out over the coming days.
I suppose one of the arguments is going to be this has taken too long already. How much longer?
Well, I mean, it's clearly taken a long time to get to this point, and it's very regrettable that we've had all these difficulties with previous chairs. As I say, I think it's very important that the new chair sets out a very clear route map, because survivors obviously want to see this process succeed. They want this to be a proper investigation. They want the truth to come to light. And I think the new chair needs to set out a clear route map to how we get to that point.
Just while we've got you, a thought on what's happening as far as Rotherham Council is concerned. We saw a report last August and then subsequently a report into the report saying that basically the council is not fit for purpose.
Well, I think what's come out of Rotherham today is very disturbing, and of course we've heard some of it before, but it's very disturbing. I think the right action has been taken in relation to dealing with the council today, but of course Rotherham is just one town, and I'm aware from the work that I do of many other towns and cities in the UK where there is evidence of child sexual exploitation on a wide scale. I've dealt, for example, with cases in Rochdale, which has also been in the news over this, and clearly this is a very wide-scale problem, and I think that emphasises the need both for the inquiry that we were talking about earlier, but also for proper police investigation of these cases.
It's good to talk to you, Richard Scorer. Thank you for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon.
Thank you.
Let's bring in now Alan Billings, who is the new Police and Crime Commissioner for South Yorkshire. He replaced Sean Wright, who eventually resigned from his job after news of the sex abuse scandal. He eventually resigned. He was basically, his hand was forced. Mr. Billings took over. You are the new broom. Doesn't look as though it's particularly clean at the moment, does it?
I'm afraid I didn't hear your question very well.
OK, let me repeat it then. You are the new broom there, but it's not very clean there at the moment. You haven't had an opportunity to sweep clean yet. How much longer might it take?
I think I heard what you were saying. Yes, I'm the new Police and Crime Commissioner, and this new report by Louise Casey is a devastating report on Rotherham Borough Council. In my mind, I think this is the definitive report now. Her language is trenchant, she gets straight to the point, and there are clearly some very big issues still there for the South Yorkshire Police to answer.
Yeah. 2 police officers being reported and being investigated, reportedly by the IPCC. What are you going to do? How do you see your role going forward, sir?
Well, my job as Police and Crime Commissioner is to hold the South Yorkshire Police to account. And one of the things I've got to satisfy myself about is that the police really are beginning to get it, to understand what it means, the whole CSE question. So what I've done is to, over the last couple of months, because I've only been in post now since November, I've been meeting victims, survivors and their families, and I've agreed with them that I'll set up a small advisory group who will tell me what the experiences of victims actually is. Because at the moment I'm simply dependent on what the social services tell me or what the police tell me. And I need to know whether what they tell me is actually what's happening on the ground. So that's my way into the issues now, to meet with those victims, those survivors and their families, and really get to grips with what their experience is. And then I can go to the police and say, look, this is what the victims are telling me, and these are the changes we've got to make.
Haven't you had 3 months to do that already, sir? We've been speaking to people today that have said that they have seen those who are responsible for child sex abuse in Rotherham in cars with young people, and that is going uninvestigated. Shouldn't you have looked into that before now?
Well, I've been looking at that since I came into the office. It's been a very short period of time. I think you have to remember that a lot of these people, the victims and the survivors, are in a very bad place. I mean, some of them clearly want action to be taken. They all want perpetrators brought to justice. Some of them are willing to come forward and be witnesses because cases have got to be put together. Some of them don't want the past raked up. So there are many different kinds of victim here, and I've got to proceed with some sensitivity. And building trust and confidence is not something that's done easily. These are people who have lost trust and lost confidence in authorities of all kinds. So there's a lot of patient work to be done here, but I think we're well on to that, or at least I'm well on to that now. I mean, the whole point about me is that I'm not associated with the past, nothing to do with Rotherham Council, and I'm new into the job. I'm also, you may not know this, but I'm also a priest, an Anglican priest, because there are issues around here of great sensitivity to do with different ethnic communities, and that's another way into the issues as far as I'm concerned.
I did know that, sir, actually. I also know that a police inspector had gone up for the job as the Police and Crime Commissioner, and you were successful instead. I go back to the point that you have been in post for 100 days. You knew the problems in Rotherham when you decided to go for election. You were successful. Every one of those 100 days, you should have been investigating what has been happening in that borough. Something rotten is happening in Rotherham. You've had 100 days to find out what it is.
Well, I haven't been there yet for 100 days. It's less than that. One of the first things I did was to agree to 62 new additional posts in the police service who will be looking into aspects of vulnerability, including child sexual exploitation. So we've strengthened the number of people in the staff. I've visited the units that are concerned with this. I've satisfied myself as far as I can that they are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. But the thing that became clear to me in this period of time is that the victims are still not persuaded that the police are doing everything they can do. Not only the police, but the social services as well. So I've been meeting with them. That's what I've been doing in this period. I've been meeting with them. I've been meeting with the families. And I've also been meeting with some of those professionals who have helped them in the past, who have often been dismissed by social services, by the police, because I need to have their perspective on it too. So quite a lot has been going on in this period of time.
OK, stand by, because we can play now for you, if you'll indulge us, sir, a short grab from an anonymous victim in Rotherham. This is what she has to say, and I'd be interested to hear your reaction off the back of it. Here we go.
I felt angry that Rotherham Council and the police have been able to get away with not just what they've done, but for how long. I kind of felt relieved that, you know, eventually that I've been heard. And I've been really upset because, you know, it brings things back, and, you know, not just about myself but about other people, and it's a really horrific thing. I think today's only the beginning. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of awareness work, prevention work. You know, there's so much that needs to be done. I don't think it's going to be something that happens overnight, but the thing that needs to happen is the correct people need to be on board. There needs to be more funding, because there's no funding to, you know, support people like me. So, and it just needs to get the right people on board, and those people not to be scared to tackle it, because I think people aren't just, you know, being scared to tackle a race issue, but for abuse itself, I don't think people seem to want to tackle it, and it needs to be tackled.
Mr. Billings, your reaction?
I think I only heard part of what was being said there, but I mean, I do sympathise hugely with the victims and the survivors, and I am hearing what they're saying. And we're having a meeting fairly soon now in which we will try to summarise their experiences and see what has to be done. But I accept that a lot that should have been done has not been done. And really getting to the bottom of that, which again I think the Louise Casey report does that as far as Rotherham Borough Council is concerned, and the report mainly of course was about the council rather than the police. But I think this is the essential business that we all now have to be into, is how do the victims and how do those who've survived this, what is their experience and what now has to be done to help them further? And of course, what do we have to do as far as the police are concerned to get at these perpetrators and bring them to justice?
So, we're just hearing, actually, as we're chatting to you, that Councillor Paul Lakin, who you'll know, but for our viewers who don't know who he is, he has confirmed his resignation as leader of Rotherham Borough Council with immediate effect. Given that we've been hearing about whistleblowers and paying off staff rather than dealing with difficult issues, and sexism and bullying and a pervading culture of silence as well. So, we know all of that. We've heard all of that in this report. What should happen as a result, sir? Should there be more resignations like we've just heard there from Councillor Lakin? And should there be, perhaps even more importantly, prosecutions?
Well, I think there are going to be prosecutions following. I think there will be some criminal cases that will be brought. Who will they be brought against? I don't know. But these are very serious issues. There's some very serious failures of duty on the part of many people. So I think that it's inescapable there are going to be some prosecutions following.
OK, so people who are listening to you in Rotherham this afternoon who say, you know what, we've heard all of this before. We've had a previous police and crime commissioner who told us this. He was eventually forced to resign. We've seen leaders of the council and deputy leaders of the council step aside before. And still, from this latest report, we can see that our children are still not safe in Rotherham. What can you say to the people of Rotherham this afternoon to reassure them that things will change now?
Well, I do understand when people say, look, we've heard this before. There have been many reports, many inquiries. I do think this report by Louise Casey is the definitive report. I think it does get to the bottom of things, and I think I would want to say to the people of Rotherham, yes, your children will be safe. We do understand what is happening here. I think things like grooming, which wasn't understood before, we understand that, we get that. And my job as Police and Crime Commissioner is to make absolutely sure that the police really do what they're supposed to do. And my way into that is by meeting with victims and survivors and their families. And that's what I intend to do over the coming days and weeks.
Your children will be safe. Is that a categorical guarantee going forward?
Well, you can never be absolutely categorical about these things.
So why did you say it then, sir? Why did you say it? Why did you say that they will be safe if then when I challenge you on it, you say you can't say that?
No, what I'm saying is that I believe that people can have confidence in social services, they can have confidence in the police. And if people have any anxieties, any suspicions, then they must go to the authorities, because we're all acutely aware now of what the situation is. So I wouldn't want people in Rotherham, or indeed any other city in the country, to feel that social services, that the police are not to be trusted. That's not true. And they must come and they must say their piece.
Work to do so. We'll let you get on with it. Alan Billings, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon.
Thank you.
You're watching Sky News, all the latest.
Sky News understands the National Crime Agency and the police watchdog have received allegations that a police officer and 2 Rotherham city councillors sexually abused underage girls. The claim follows news that the cabinet of Rotherham councillors quit in response to the release of a report that concluded the authority was not fit for purpose, citing an archaic culture of sexism, bullying and discomfort around race. The inquiry was commissioned in the wake of the J report into the town's sex abuse scandal that said more than 1,400 children have been subjected to rape, violence and trafficking by gangs of mainly Asian men. Mike McCarthy reports.
The council crest that in years gone by has been flown with pride in Rotherham seems now to have become a symbol of its shame. The authority is in crisis, with senior councillors resigning, key administrators having already fled, and the Communities Secretary now saying a team of commissioners will be sent in to take over.
It is with a real heavy heart that I'm having to resort to such central intervention. The crimes committed against children is so appalling. The Council's remedy is so utterly inadequate. The government cannot, in good conscience, turn a blind eye.
Abuse victims in Rotherham believe that the true attitude of a complicit council is finally emerging.
I felt angry that Rotherham Council and the police have been able to get away with not just what they've done, but for how long. I kind of felt relieved that, eventually that I've been heard. It has been an emotional day, but I do think it is a good day for people like myself.
The government official charged with investigating Rotherham Council's response to revelations about child sex abuse summed up her findings with damning clarity. Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council is not fit for purpose, she said. The council is currently incapable of tackling its weaknesses, she continued, and Rotherham Council goes to some length to cover up information and to silence whistleblowers. Rotherham Council needs a fresh start.
I was very concerned to find in Rotherham Borough Council that essentially they are still failing their children. The services to victims of child sexual exploitation simply are not good enough. And on top of that, there was an aspect where actually they couldn't deal with the race and ethnicity dimension of the problem of child sexual exploitation, which meant essentially nothing was done effectively to tackle the problem.
What makes the latest findings all the more shocking is that they relate to another report last year which exposed the true extent of the abuse by mainly Pakistani heritage men. Added to that are new claims that 2 Rotherham councillors and a South Yorkshire police officer have been accused of sex with underage girls. The damage goes on and on. A brief statement from the council said the report reopens old wounds for victims and that it recognises the need for a fresh start. The response from one victim: it's about time. Mike McCarthy, Sky News, Rotherham.
Well, let's get more from our political correspondent Jason Farrell in Westminster. And Jason, you spent time in Rotherham talking to many of those involved, including victims. And although there have been resignations and there appear to be potential criminal inquiries going on, it feels like this is far from the end of this whole tawdry affair.
Jeremy, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we saw back in August there were resignations. The Crime Commissioner stood down, the Head of Children's Services stood down, the Chief Executive of the Council stood down. And now we're seeing that the Cabinet has offered their resignation and again the Council leader offering to resign. But the truth is, and this is what the victims have said to me, that really what needs to happen is more services for them to outreach projects and the things that have been missing from the Council all along. Those outreach projects, many of them have been shut down. They need to be reinstated, and there needs to be a huge investment. I mean, one of the key things is still the recognition of the problem. That was the thing that has seemed to be holding things back all the way along, and that comes through loud and clear in Louise Casey's report, that there was a denial within the council that this was going on. Obviously, these commissioners now are going to come in and try to sort things out, but they're going to need money behind them because, as we've seen, this is a huge problem. The other thing that's going to happen is this criminal investigation with the National Crime Agency looking over the investigations that are currently being conducted by South Yorkshire Police. And ultimately, what these victims want more than anything else, and they're still not getting, is justice.
Jason, thanks very much. The Home Secretary has turned to a judge from New Zealand in her effort to find someone suitable to chair the troubled Westminster child abuse inquiry. Justice Lowell Goddard is the third person to be appointed to the job after a series of resignations. So, does she satisfy the victims looking for justice? Tom Parminter has more.
She lives as far away from the British establishment as you can get. And Justice Lau Goddard's career in New Zealand means she has the credentials to do the job. She's charged with delivering the British government's promises on child abuse.
I am now more determined than ever to expose the people behind these despicable crimes and the people and institutions that knew about abuse but didn't act, that failed to help when it was their duty, sometimes their very purpose, to do so.
She knows the inquiry could unravel an alleged paedophile network operating in Westminster in the 1970s and 80s. That's why both Baroness Butler-Sloss and Fiona Woolf had to step aside. They were too close to the British establishment. The new chair had to be independent. For now, she has the backing of many survivors and campaigners.
The fact that the Home Secretary has chosen somebody from a different continent, but who has a good knowledge of how the British system works, I think that was really, really important. And it is somebody, I believe, of high credibility.
The promises keep coming. Secret files like the one unearthed by Sky News last month should not have been withheld by the Cabinet Office, the Home Secretary said. Anyone with relevant information must reveal it. We also know now that the Official Secrets Act will not prevent anyone from giving evidence to Justice Goddard's inquiry. She flies in facing an enormous challenge, trying to unravel decades of secretive child abuse and cover-ups. And it goes far beyond Westminster. Some survivors have already taken the brave decision to speak out. Others may choose to do so when they're sure that Justice Goddard is on their side. The inquiry that will bear her name could last for the next 3 or 4 years. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Westminster.
As a warning that the worst of the spending